Be talking about the nation of intrigue and the preemptive strike doctrine. So, as many of you are probably aware, the U.S. is in a very close call situation with Iran. Trump has tried and is currently trying to distance himself from the hawkish stance and the saber rattling that is going on between Israel and Iran. But obviously, due to his relationships personally, we might be drawn into something irreversible. But anyway, we're going to talk about the historical context of what's going on currently and why it's basically just a repeat of what's happened uh, in very recent history. Okay, so to start, I'll mention one thing. So the other day, I was playing a game, uh, Metal Gear Solid V Ground Zeroes. It's like the one Metal Gear Solid game I haven't played uh, because I don't think it's that important compared to the other V, which is the Phantom Pain. But uh, in the later Metal Gear Solid games, they have a historical timeline of events, and this is the one game that I noticed a certain event that is not in any of the others. And it said in 1981, Israel launches Operation Opera. And I was like, hold on, I've never heard of that before. So I did some looking around. Operation Opera, otherwise known as Operation Babylon, was a strike against a French nuclear reactor in Iraq. It was created by the French as a kind of collaboration thing because this is still a time period when the West is not doing regime change to state build, but the West is doing just like state building and development to improve relations in the Middle East. And so there's a French reactor in Iraq, and it's called the Osirak reactor. And Iran and Iraq had just started the conflict between the two of them, the Iraq-Iran war, a notably inconsequential war, which basically saw nothing change. I'm pretty sure it was status quo antebellum afterwards, like in regards to territory. But anyway, in 1980 that started. 1981, upon fear from the government for development of Iraqi nuclear weapons or potential for them to develop nuclear weapons in the future, the Israelis bombed it just out of nowhere. They were condemned nationally, and the UN condemned them. You know, why would a nation, for no reason at all, bomb another country? Their nuclear projects. Uh, that's like a terrible strategy, a terrible decision to make because while they saw it as a way of kneecapping the ability to have a reactor and a nuclear program, what that really does is it just, one, makes the nation that was attacked need to have such a like proliferation ability even more, and two, it's just going to send it underground, so it makes it untraceable, investigable. The IAEA, which like is supposed to be an organization that tracks and monitors nations' nuclear development, if it's underground, what ability do they have to even monitor that? That's more dangerous for potential situations of rogue states. But aside from that, um, nothing else really happened. You know, they struck the reactor, destroyed the nuclear power plant, killed several people, a French person as well, and then they're kind of just like, "Yep, we achieved our goals. We don't care. We're good." And then the Iraq-Iran war continued, which uh, saw like Western support greatly for Iraq, uh, even though the U.S. kind of also supported the attack on the nuclear power plant. Most notably, Bill Clinton praising the judgment call on striking the reactors. uh, neocon things. But anyway, Israel also at this time has secret nuclear weapons and have a nuclear program. So it's like they're really just trying to be the dog in the Middle East with the only nuke in the fight. But timeline-wise, after that happened, their little Iraq-Iran war finished. Then you have instability, you know, sexual violence, civil violence, and then war that kind of ended fast. It was like 2-month war, the invasion of Kuwait. I guess the taking back of the invasion of Kuwait. That kind of inconsequential. But after that, uh, then you had the actual invasion of Operation Iraqi Freedom, and then the subsequent collapse of the regime and all authority, which devolved into a fragile democracy, as historians call it, and then upsprung the Islamic Caliphate, ISIS, as it's colloquially known. So let's take another look at historical context then. All right, so we had a nation in the Middle East destroy a nuclear program of another nation. Several years later, the same thing happened. Israel once again struck the nuclear program reactor specifically within Syria in 2007. This obviously hurt the nuclear power capabilities of Syria. Not much later, although there was no direct like invasion or ground war like there had been with Iraq, you then have a civil unrest, civil war type interference happen within Syria, and then it collapsed because of ding 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 jihadists, just like in Iraq. Now, Iraq and Syria were both under the rule of the Ba'athist Party, which was like very secular and like very authoritarian. Like they wouldn't necessarily promote Islam, and they also kind of tolerated the minorities, uh, specifically like Christian minorities within their countries. Uh, you know, Something that's not really seen throughout the Middle East. Syria, most notably, out of all the other Middle Eastern nations, protected their Christian population. As we can see right now with what's going on after Al Nusra took over, that's not the case. As like daily, people are getting kidnapped, killed. Churches are being taken and destroyed, converted mosques. The typical thing that happens um, in the Islamic conquests historically. Um, but we're going to jump over to the main topic of focus. Right now, again, as everyone knows, Israel and Iran saber with each other. Over the past several years, there has been assassinations and bombings done by Israel within Iran. Iran's been basically passive and just saving face with any time they responded, like even alerting the U.S. like, "Hey, we're going to attack this place. We're going to send drones here," as a way of diplomatically making themselves still look like they have the responsive capabilities, but also while not angering or raising their threat level uh, perceived by the U.S. or Israel. And this had been working for a while, up until like very recently. But you had Israel attack the nuclear facilities within Iran, which we've talked about with the past two countries, Iraq and Syria, was the first step in the, I guess, coincidence factor before they devolved into civil unrest or civil war directly, and then collapse and take over by a jihadist state entity. Differently between these nations, Iran is Shiite while the other two were Sunni. Uh, and like for example, the Iraq-Iran war happened largely because of those differences, the Shiite-Sunni uh, conflicts, which this has been going on like since the end of the Rashidun Caliphate, the Shiite-Sunni conflict. Um, Most notably, the Yemeni area is the only other area aside from like I don't want to call it Greater Persia, but like if you think of the old Persia, so like including up to like modern day Turkey and large parts of Iraq. Um, that's like the Shiite area, and then, as I just said, Yemen is also a Shiite, but they're like a minority in the Islamic world, and so um, based on that, the chances that they're going to have a kind of jihadist revolt or revolution like the other places, because they also kind of have a theocratic state, is less likely. Also, based on just like trends within the Iranian realm, that doesn't really seem to be a thing that's going to be possible. However, the war factor is potentially very close. Netanyahu has stated he will do anything that he can, anything that is possible, even if it's them alone against Iran, meaning the U.S. wouldn't be that support. I'd love to have no U.S. engagement in the Middle East. That would be amazing, as it directly affects me and it directly affects like my entire generation and the next generation, and has affected the previous generation and then generation before that. It's been a very consequential endeavor for the health and longevity of the so-called American empire. This globalist um, era has just been destroying the nation. But anyway, hopefully this event doesn't turn out to be like the previous two. But let's go back and talk about Israel now, because I talked about the historical coincidences, which again, those aren't historical coincidence isn't really a thing. If you look through history, there's no such thing as coincidence between events over nations and like their lifetimes. It tends to be there's an actor within the play that is causing such things to happen. But Israel has been the active actor within this situation. Why do I say that? So, ever since their establishment, they've kind of been what I would call a rogue state. Most people think of places like North Korea as a rogue state, or I don't know, say Cuba as a rogue state, just because of their high volatility towards the United States. But if you really think of it outside of just a biased worldview of being a stateside person, that's really not the case. Um, Numerous times throughout the second half of the 20th century, there have been terror attacks and operations carried out by either Mossad or the Israeli government, which noticeably the American government, federal agencies, same with British and French, have all condemned or been negatively affected by. You have the attack on a British hotel in the Suez Crisis. It was an attempt to take control over the area from the European powers, I believe. Um, I think this was during one of the Arab Springs when Israel was in Egypt, potentially. That one's a little shaky on my mind. I don't really quite remember that one, but I remember that they bombed a British hotel and it killed like military from Britain. Uh, then there's the what was it? Oh yeah, the USS Liberty, the American ship, which was uh, severely damaged roughly like half of its sailors became casualties, and it was helped to be covered up by the intelligence agencies of the U.S. Actually, the gag order being placed on all sailors who are on that ship. Very, very awful incident. Like really, really bad, and it was carried out by the Israeli Air Force and Navy. And like the only reason that people even know it exists is because there just happened to be another ship within distance of it, um, because the fleet that it was attached to was not going to come to its aid. They had denied. I can't really say this because I don't know the validity of it, but they denied uh, the call to help that was transmitted out by the makeshift communication system that the sailors managed to create. But this was done to try and pull the U.S. into the war against Egypt that Israel was fighting. Notably, they've also um, held the Sinai territory of Egypt for longer than they should have. It was eventually returned, but it was under extreme diplomatic pressure. Golan Heights, uh, they still retain that, which was taken in the Six States War. So, it was part of a war, sure. But I would argue that um, they kind of forced Syria into that war because Syria was a non active member and they just invaded and took over it. But yeah, so there's a lot of um, things that have been done by said nation. I'm not going to say that they aren't, I'm not going to say it's justified to do these things, but I understand, uh, in a historical sense, the use of intrigue and other means of diplomacy being necessary for a nation's survival. So I can't fault that. Uh, but yeah, like even now, back on deployment, I recall one thing being announced when I was on the ship, um, when we were in the Red Sea. Do not, and this was like stressed, do not start being anti-Semitic because of our uh, existence in the Red Sea. Because, like, why would you need to say that unless the reason that we're over there is simply to support them in their endeavors, you know? No, we're there to defend trade and support maritime capabilities around the world. Yeah, I'm sure that the US could handle, even if it wouldn't like it, the GDP hit by the Suez not being a usable route. I mean, if we want to talk about that, we also should talk about the fact that the US literally pays off Egypt um, to not dislike Israel, like hundreds of, I think hundreds of billions, I think it is, a year. Um, we send in foreign aid to Egypt under the guise of them being friendly to Israel. That's kind of crazy. It's like, what government would do that? Like, is that the American government? It's kind of weird. But anyway, I think I've covered all the things I wanted to cover. Yeah, hopefully it's kind of understandable. The speech that I gave, or I guess the way that I spoke. I feel like I rambled on a bit, but anyway, thanks for watching. Good night.